Alexis St. a simple Canadian trapper, was destined to become the most extraordinary patient in medical history. William Beaumont, a military surgeon and a man of duty, was on the cusp of a discovery that would revolutionize the understanding of the human body. On June 6, 1822, an accidental musket shot ripped through St. Martin's abdomen. The wound was deemed fatal. Dr. Beaumont saved the young man's life, but the wound never fully closed, leaving an opening, a fistula, directly into his stomach. This was no divine revelation or stroke of genius. It was a window into a living, working organ. Beaumont recognized an unprecedented opportunity and began his experiments. Day after day, year after year, he observed how food was broken down and how gastric juices functioned. Great discoveries are rarely born from pure genius. More often, they are forged from chance, pain, and insatiable, pragmatic curiosity. The human body remained a profound mystery. For centuries, medicine groped in the dark, relying on dogma rather than experience. Diseases were considered divine punishment or the work of evil spirits. Following the tenets of Galen and Hippocrates, doctors practiced bloodletting for centuries. They administered emetics and purgatives, applied leeches to patients, poisoned them with mercury, and forced them to swallow horrific concoctions of herbs and excrement. The treatment was often worse than the disease itself. Surgery. It was butchery, not science. Wounds were cauterized with red-hot irons or doused with boiling oil. Operations were performed without anesthesia on conscious patients, their screams echoing through hospitals. Infection was not understood. Pus was even considered laudable, a sign that a wound was maturing and cleansing itself. The surgeon's hands and instruments were covered in blood and grime. Sterility? They had no concept of it whatsoever. Surviving a serious injury or even a simple operation was a miracle. Death was a constant companion, and suffering was the norm. This was a world where mysticism and superstition supplanted knowledge, and the authority of ancient texts was valued above direct observation, a world desperately in need of someone brave enough to look inside. That man was William Beaumont, a military surgeon, a man of duty, as we already know. But what shaped him as a physician? He hailed from Connecticut from a humble farming family. He learned medicine not in prestigious European universities, but as an apprentice to local doctors. This gave him practical experience, not academic dogma. He saw patients not in sterile auditoriums, but on battlefields and in barracks. He witnessed wounds, infections, and death. He saw how the most respected treatments, bloodletting and emetics, repeatedly led only to increased suffering or death. His journey began in the Army, where he served as a field surgeon. Every day he confronted a harsh reality. Soldiers died not only from bullets, but also from treatment. Pus was considered normal. Blood was drawn until patients were exhausted. Beaumont could not accept this helplessness. He could not reconcile himself to the fact that doctors were, in essence, mere observers, and at times, executioners. Unlike many of his colleagues, he did not accept every word from ancient treatises on faith. He trusted his eyes. He trusted experience. He saw that official medicine not only failed to help, it often killed. This was not abstract knowledge from books. It was experience seared into his memory by hundreds of fatalities. This was his personal war against ignorance, ignited every time he picked up a scalpel. He did not seek glory. He sought answers, and he was ready to find them where others feared to even look. Alexis St. survived, but the wound that pierced his abdomen never fully healed. It left a permanent gaping opening, a fistula, in the young trapper as body, through which his stomach could be seen. Beaumont, against expectations, did not abandon his unusual patient. He took him under his care, providing shelter and food, essentially turning the trapper into his servant. This was not merely charity, it was a unique, unprecedented opportunity. Directly below St. Martin's left ribs, a coin-sized opening now constantly gaped. From it, a clear, slightly viscous fluid, gastric juice, continuously seeped. Beaumont daily cleaned the fistula, monitored its condition, and noted its unusual properties. He observed how this fluid corroded tissues, how it reacted to air, and how it behaved with various materials. But what exactly did it do inside? How did digestion truly occur? For centuries, scientists had debated, based on assumptions and accidental dissections, was it a mechanical process, grinding food like a mill? Or some mystical heat of life, an invisible force inherent in living beings? One day, faced with a mundane but pressing problem, he had run out of the oil he used not only to lubricate the edges of the fistula, but also to preserve food for his patient. Beaumont paused. He had another, far more potent preservative at hand, unknown and mysterious, gastric juice. He decided to conduct an experiment that seemed insane for its time. He took a small piece of boiled beef, carefully tied it to a thin silk thread, and cautiously lowered the meat directly into Alexis St. Martin's stomach through the fistula. The thread remained outside, serving as a leash, allowing him to retrieve the sample for study at any moment. He waited. He observed. After 1 hour, Beaumont pulled the thread. The piece of meat had noticeably shrunk in size, its edges soft, as if melting before his eyes. He lowered it again. After 2 hours, then another 3, he repeated the procedure, noting the changes each time. When, several hours later, the surgeon retrieved the thread for the last time, almost nothing remained of the meat. It had not been ground. There were no signs of mechanical action. It had not been cooked. The temperature inside the stomach was not high enough. It had been dissolved completely. This was a moment of pure, unadulterated scientific revelation. Not mechanical grinding, as believed for centuries. Not an ephemeral, inexplicable heat of life, as others had speculated. This was the work of a powerful chemical reagent, invisible yet tangible, aggressive, and incredibly effective. With this single, simple yet direct observation, William Beaumont shattered centuries-old theories of digestion based on guesswork, dogma, and mysticism. He proved that the stomach was not merely a grinding bag, it was a true chemical laboratory. This was his first monumental discovery, made not in a university lecture hall or in laboratory flasks, but at the bedside of an ordinary man whose tragedy became the key to the greatest mystery of the human body. It was the first step toward understanding how life works. The discovery of the chemical nature of digestion was just the beginning. Beaumont did not stop. He realized that he had before him not merely a wounded man, but a unique, living laboratory. He began systematically, with a meticulousness unheard of for that era, to investigate the stomach's function. He did not trust assumptions, he trusted only direct evidence. Day after day, month after month, he conducted hundreds of experiments. He took food samples, meat, vegetables, bread, and lowered them into St. Martin's stomach, each time recording the duration and observing the changes. He extracted gastric juice through the fistula, collected it in test tubes, and studied its properties outside the body. He tested how the juice dissolved food in a test tube at different temperatures, comparing this to what happened inside the stomach. He measured the organ's internal temperature. He monitored how the color of the stomach lining changed with different emotions during hunger or when ill. For these observations, Beaumont invented his own instruments. He created special tubes and flasks for collecting the juice. He used thin threads and small mesh bags to lower food and retrieve it without damaging the organ. His methods were simple but incredibly effective, allowing him to obtain precise, reproducible data rather than vague conjectures. The work was not easy. Alexis St. Martin was headstrong. He was not a scientist. He was a simple man bound to the doctor by circumstances. He grew tired of the constant experiments. He ran away from Beaumont several times, returning to his former life as a trapper, marrying and having children. But Beaumont, driven by his purpose, always found him, persuaded him to return, offering shelter and support. These interruptions, these losses of his patient, did not break Beaumont. On the contrary, they forced him to refine his methods, to be even more attentive to detail, so as to maximize the time when St. Martin was present. He learned from every setback, every difficulty. And most importantly, Beaumont did not keep his discoveries secret. In 1833, he published his findings in a monumental work titled Experiments and Observations on the Gastric Juice and the Physiology of Digestion. The book was written not in Latin, the language of the scientific elite, but in English, making it accessible to a wide range of physicians and researchers. He meticulously described his methods, his experiments, and his precise measurements. He didn't just state his discoveries, he showed how he made them. He gave the world not just knowledge, but a tool for acquiring new knowledge. He did not seek authority in ancient texts, he created a new one. His work became a cornerstone of modern physiology, demonstrating to the world the power of direct observation and experimentation. His book, this monumental work, did not bring Beaumont immediate recognition. On the contrary, the medical establishment, which for centuries had relied on the authority of ancient texts and complex, often useless terminology, met his discoveries with distrust and outright hostility. How could a simple military surgeon, a self-taught man, challenge knowledge that had been passed down for generations? He was called a charlatan and accused of fraud. His methods, based on direct observation of a living human, seemed primitive, unworthy of true science. "This cannot be true," whispered voices in university lecture halls. The stomach is not a chemical retort. Digestion is a complex mechanical process, or perhaps a mystical manifestation of the life force. The doctrines of Galen, revered for centuries, could not be false. Everything was called into question. St. Martin himself was labeled a stooge. It was asserted that Beaumont was manipulating him and that the experiments were unethical. "How can one study a human like a guinea pig? It's sacrilege," exclaimed those who just yesterday had bled patients to unconsciousness and cauterized wounds with hot irons. These accusations were an attempt to discredit not only Beaumont, but also the very method of empirical knowledge. For if it proved true that truth could be found not in ancient tomes, but in direct observation, then their entire world, built on dogma and authority, would collapse. They tried to ignore him. They tried to silence his work. But the facts were too compelling, and Beaumont was not alone. Despite the wave of criticism, there were those who saw in his work not a threat, but the future. Several influential physicians, individuals with sharp minds and open perspectives, rose to his defense. They understood that what Beaumont had done was a breakthrough. It was not merely a new theory, it was a new approach to medicine, an approach based on observation, experimentation, and evidence. They saw real results, not just empty words. And their support was invaluable. It protected Beaumont from complete oblivion and allowed his discoveries to pave their way into the world of science. This path, however, was thorny. Yet his book did not go unnoticed. It crossed the Atlantic. In Europe, the center of scientific thought at the time, Beaumont's ideas found fertile ground. There, where physiology was just beginning to establish itself as an independent science, where scholars like the German giant Johannes Müller were already seeking truth in experience rather than dogma, the American surgeon's work caused a sensation. Müller, author of the monumental Handbook of Human Physiology, not only acknowledged the value of Beaumont's observations, he incorporated them into his own works. He cited him. He confirmed his findings. This was not just approval, it was recognition from a leading mind of the era. Soon, step by step, academic circles in Europe began to reevaluate their views. For decades they had relied on theories that were more than 1,000 years old. Now, direct evidence lay before them, precise, reproducible experiments conducted on a living human. Scientists in Paris, London, and Berlin began to cite Beaumont. His methods, once called primitive, were now considered exemplary. His observations, once declared fraudulent, became the basis for new research. Old theories crumbled. The idea of mechanical grinding of food, of a mystical heat of life, all gave way to chemical reality. The stomach ceased to be merely a mill. It became a laboratory, precisely as Beaumont had described. His book, rejected by many in his homeland, became essential reading for leading physiologists worldwide. William Beaumont, a self-taught man from rural America, a man who dared to trust his own eyes rather than the authority of ancient tomes, slowly but surely transformed from an outcast into an undisputed authority. His name began to be mentioned alongside the greatest discoverers. His approach, based on direct observation and rigorous experimentation, became the gold standard. He didn't just discover how digestion worked, he opened a new path for all of medicine, a path to knowledge based on evidence. It was a triumph of reason over dogma, a triumph of observation over blind faith. And it was the triumph of one man whose persistence changed how we understand our own bodies and how we treat them. Now, with the nature of digestion revealed, medicine gained not just knowledge, but a powerful tool. It fundamentally changed the basis of medical practice. Physicians could no longer ignore the chemical processes occurring within the body. The stomach ceased to be a mysterious furnace or mill. It became a living laboratory whose reactions could now be studied and predicted. Beaumont's discoveries directly influenced dietetics. Before him, dietary recommendations were pure folk wisdom or superstition. Now, doctors knew which foods digested quickly and which slowly. They understood that fatty foods lingered longer in the stomach, while protein required more acid. This allowed for the creation of the first scientifically based diets for patients with digestive disorders. There were no longer meaningless fasts or attempts to grind away illness. The ability to alleviate patients' suffering by prescribing proper nutrition emerged. The treatment of stomach diseases became less barbaric. While ulcers and indigestion were previously treated with bloodletting, mercury, or laxatives, often worsening the condition, the focus now shifted. Doctors began to seek ways to neutralize excessive acidity or stimulate gastric juice production. Although specific medications appeared later, the approach itself changed radically. Instead of attempting to cleanse or balance mythical fluids, medical professionals began to work with real chemical processes. Although Beaumont was not a surgical innovator in terms of operative techniques, his work laid the groundwork for improvements in abdominal surgery. Understanding the functions of the stomach and intestines allowed surgeons to operate more intelligently. The number of complications related to improper nutrition after abdominal surgeries decreased. Patient survival rates after complex digestive system operations began to slowly but steadily increase. Most importantly, Beaumont changed the way medical knowledge was acquired. His work became a manifesto for evidence-based medicine. He showed that what was written in ancient tomes was irrelevant if it contradicted direct observation. This was a call to empiricism. Medical universities, especially in Europe, began to restructure their curricula. Physiology, previously considered part of anatomy or philosophy, emerged as an independent experimental science. New laboratories appeared where scientists, inspired by Beaumont, began systematically studying the functions of other organs, the liver, kidneys, and lungs. The methods he used, precise measurement, systematic experimentation, and the comparison of in vivo and in vitro data, became the gold standard. William Beaumont didn't just unlock the secret of digestion, he opened the eyes of an entire era. He proved that the human body is not merely a collection of mystical humors and energies, but a complex yet knowable system, a system functioning according to specific physical and chemical laws. This knowledge gave doctors not only hope, but also real tools to combat diseases. It allowed them to move from blind guesswork to targeted treatment. And thanks to this, millions of lives were saved and suffering was alleviated. It was a revolution that began with one gunshot and one man who dared to look into an open wound. The story of Alexis St. and William Beaumont is more than just a medical anomaly. It is a testament to how the deepest truths can emerge from the most improbable circumstances. An accidental musket ball, a gaping wound, and the indomitable persistence of one man who refused to accept knowledge on faith. From this tragic accident, from pain and inconvenience, Beaumont forged not merely an understanding of digestion, he created a precedent. He showed that the deepest mysteries of the human body are revealed not in ancient tomes or speculative debates, but in direct, fearless observation. This was not just a discovery, it was a manifesto, an invitation to the world. Look inside, see, and trust your own eyes. Because it is there, in the most ordinary reality, in the most unexpected wound, that the keys to life's greatest enigmas are sometimes hidden.